All right, let's begin here. The inauguration of South Africa's 7th democratically elected president will signal the start of the government of national unity. The GNU administration is open to every party that is willing to work with the ANC to take the country forward. But it is different to the 1994 government of national unity under Nelson Mandela, which was guided by the interim constitution and included parties with more than 5% of the vote. What also sets this 1994 government of national unity apart was that the ANC fell short of a two-thirds majority, while last month it fell well below 50% and was unable to govern alone. We'll bring you that particular story just a little bit later on. Let me take you to this live developing story now. Foreign dignitaries are arriving in South Africa for President Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, ahead of his inauguration there. Now, most of the leaders who will be attending the ceremony on Wednesday are from the SADC region and leaders of the regional organizations in Africa. The AU will be represented by the AU Commission's chairperson, Musa Faki Mahamat. Cuba has sent its vice president, Salvador Valdez Mesa, while other countries around the world will be represented by the ambassadors and high commissioner. Let's get more details now and speak to our international editor, Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, thank you so much for your time. I mean, it should have been a difficult task, especially to make arrangements for international guests due to what transpired after the elections. But it looks like there will be leaders attending the inauguration. Can you please tell us which countries have arrived so far?
Well, I can say to you, let's focus on the arrival. We have the arrival of the president of Congo-Brazzaville, President Sassangweso. As you can see, this is another arrival this afternoon, or as we are looking at the evening. Earlier on, we saw the arrival of President of Angola, who is currently the chair of the SADC region. Now, this is the plane carrying the president of Congo-Brazzaville. Congo-Brazzaville, a very important country in Central Africa, and the relationship between South Africa and Congo-Brazzaville are quite strong. Many heads of states previously who led South Africa visited this country, and you have a situation where the relationship with the president-elect is also strong. The president of Congo-Brazzaville arriving there, Bongiwe.
And of course, Sophie, we have seen some of the other arrivals as well. Who else has touched down on African soil?
When you look at O.R. Tambo, we saw earlier on the arrival of the president of the Mauritius, but also early hours of this morning, we saw the arrival of the vice president of Cuba, who also visited Freedom Park. And we also saw the arrival here at Waterkloof, the president of Namibia, the president of Zimbabwe, and as I pointed on earlier on, the president of Angola. We also expect the president of Mozambique, President Nyusi, to arrive here at Waterkloof. The Tanzanian President Suluhu Hassan is also expected to arrive later today. And of course, the chair of ECOWAS, Nigeria, the president of Nigeria, is also expected to arrive today. We will also see the arrival of the delegation from Lesotho. The delegation from Lesotho will be led by the King of Lesotho, who is a head of state in that country, even though he is not the head of government. We will also see the arrival of the head of state of Kingdom of Eswatini here at Waterkloof later today. So we are going to see more leaders arriving later today here at Waterkloof. Most of these leaders are from the SADC region, and also those who are representing regional organizations on the continent, and also the AU chairperson, the commissioner, Musa Faki, is expected to attend the inauguration. He will be arriving later today, and therefore you have mainly leaders on the continent.
And, you know, another thing, of course, that a number of people have been talking about is, you know, the issue of a government of a national unity, because effectively the inauguration signals the start of that particular government and possibly how it could handle issues in relation to foreign policy. Any indication how will the president-elect navigate the interest of his party and those in the opposition, especially on this issue of foreign policy?
Well, we know that when I spoke to the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, the first Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, she is also the chair of the subcommittee of the ANC on international relations and cooperation, Mzwandile Mbeje. She indicated that when coming to the foreign policy, it's a no, no, no. And also you would recall on Saturday, the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, did emphasize the fact that they are not going to agree to toning down of the foreign policy of South Africa, because it is anchored on human rights. As the Minister of Water Affairs, Senzo Mchunu, is working towards the plane to receive the President of Angola. But also you know that I think President Ramaphosa has been very vocal on international stage and in these multilateral organizations that did profile South Africa. I can't see him toning down in relation to the foreign policy. The question that many are asking right now, particularly outside the Republic of South Africa, is who is going to be the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. You know that Dr. Naledi Pandor is not in the list, but that doesn't, it's not a problem, because the president can still decide to appoint someone who is not necessarily in a member of parliament to a ministerial position. So some people are hoping that there will be continuity as you continue to phase in young leaders in South Africa in cabinet, but we don't know. Only the president has that privilege to appoint cabinet members, and therefore he is the only one as we speak who is perhaps better positioned to answer that question.
And of course, Sophie, there's a lot to talk about, especially when one looks even at, you know, reactions, for example, as South Africa is in this particular moment now. What have been the reactions, especially from across the world, both from the north and the south?
Can you repeat the question? It's quite noisy now with that Basotho group who are currently rendering an item. Can you kindly repeat, Bongiwe?
I was asking that when it comes to reactions, for example, from across the world and both, you know, the north and the south, about this moment where South Africa finds itself in, what has been some of those reactions?
Well, when you look at the developed north, countries in the developed north, clearly they are happy because, as I pointed out, I have interacted with many diplomats in South Africa, both from the south and the north. I know that many countries have been talking about a coalition even before South Africa went to elections. The north is hoping that the coalition will lead to a situation where South Africa will tone down at the international level. As you know, that particularly after that issue of Lady R, the Russia vessel that docked in Cape Town, there has been concerns about the relationship between South Africa and Russia. And therefore, people were lobbying very hard for this agreement or the form of government that we are going to have in South Africa to be a reality. On the other hand, you had countries in the south, the friends of South Africa, who were hoping that the governing party will continue to have the necessary majority to form government and continue to be a strong voice of the developing south on the continent. That will apply to many countries in Africa. As you know that the ANC is the oldest liberation organization on the continent, and many other parties that came after the ANC, which led to liberation of other countries, they modeled their establishment around what the ANC stood for and what the ANC was all about, fighting oppression and colonialism, and therefore they were hoping that ANC will continue to have the necessary majority to govern South Africa. And therefore questions will be raised. It will not be public at times as to where to from here. In the southern region in particular, you know that you have many liberation organizations that are still leading respective countries. When you look at Mozambique, when you look at Namibia, when you look at Angola, when you look at Zimbabwe, Botswana, Tanzania, and therefore behind the scenes questions will be raised in terms of how do we sustain our relationship with South Africa with this type of government, and also questions around will South Africa continue to prioritize the southern region and also continue to have these strong ties with the former liberation organization. I can imagine a country like Cuba in particular that has enjoyed a strong support from South Africa since 1994 is also looking at what's going to happen. But as I pointed out, the subcommittee of the ANC, the chair, said that they will not agree to tamper with the foreign policy. The Secretary General of the ANC said the same thing. You could see, I mean, the response from the north, there was excitement. You look at countries such as the United States of America, Joe Biden's speech or statement. You look at the European Union, there was a relief, and you can see even the markets how they are acting. And therefore we were correct to say that if there was to be a coalition, it will be a coalition either that is favored by the West and also by people who are more lenient to the left, or it will be a coalition that will be favored or supported by big business and international investors, including your developed north. And this is what we have right now. And they've been working hard to lobby for this kind of a situation in the country. And unfortunately, the challenges in South Africa led to this outcome. And I think the ANC in particular, during its General Council next year, midterm review, they will have to really reflect at what happened and where to from here. And you know that this is President Cyril Ramaphosa's last term in office as the president of the ANC, but also the president of the country. And therefore he's got nothing to lose. He can work very hard and change the situation and be firm and look at delivery, so that come next elections, perhaps the ANC does perform better. But unfortunately, elections are around the corner in relation to local government elections. And we'll see even tomorrow the by-elections, that Super Wednesday in KZN, what will be the verdict. So the ANC has a lot of work to do.
Especially, speaking about that, Sophie, while I have you with us, there's also Mzwandile Mbeje here in studio, our political editor, who's just joined us for this conversation. Mzwandile, of course, Sophie talks about quite a lot in terms of developments, especially when you think about, this marking the start of this government of national unity, this cabinet that a number of people are saying, what shape or form is it going to take? So I suppose as the dignitaries are arriving, we can talk to just how much of that also signals this other dawn for South Africa.
In fact, it's very interesting. She was speaking, sorry about that.
No problem.
She was speaking about liberation movements, mainly on the African continent and in the southern region. And one of the parties here in South Africa, which has been strongly aligned to some of those parties, the PAC, has just announced that it's joining the government of national unity. So also raising a bit of questions around the progressive caucus that had been formed in parliament because they had intended it to be a bloc.
I was going to ask you, what happens now?
So clearly, many parties are looking after their interests, because when all is said and done, when you contest to win power, you want access to state resources so that you are able to, effect whatever change you need. So if you are staying outside, I guess people will be asking a number of questions. And I think also for others, it's strategic. So what is it that they want to get going forward? But it's quite interesting. I mean, I've been looking at the social media reaction to what the PAC has done. So clearly, a lot more is still coming. It looks like the ANC is engaging a number of smaller parties. I guess the ANC is being also very strategic because we don't know how long they will be in this stable environment with the DA. So should in future they decide to part ways, I think it would have been able to secure those other parties. I guess it's a long game from all parties. I think all of them, so they have something to gain from this.
Quite a long game, as you're saying, and it begs the question, what happens next and who makes it into cabinet? And Sophie, let me bring you back in as we're seeing some activity there. In fact, as far as the arrivals is concerned, pick up from us, for us where you can see, how far you can see, what can you see around you. We're seeing, of course, the dancers, and we can get a sense now that we are expecting, the president to alight any moment now, where you are.
Yes, he will leave the aircraft very soon. As you can see, the ambassador of Congo-Brazzaville getting in the plane, and that's what they normally do. And the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Senzo Mchunu, is waiting down here for the formalities. And as you can see, that group rendering an item there. So in a minute now, the president of Congo-Brazzaville, President Sassangweso, will leave the plane. And currently we see some of the people who are accompanying the president leaving the plane. And therefore, if you can check that picture there, or that those visuals, you'll see him coming out while you are talking to Mzwandile Mbeje there, my colleague.
Yeah, and of course, so as I bring you in now, when you then are looking at this particular big moment for the country, it's not only a big moment for South Africa, but the SADC region as well. This is also quite significant because South Africa is not in isolation.
Absolutely, and South Africa is a leader of the African continent in many respects. And what does happen here, also many other people take note. Of course, not that it's a leader because it's better than everyone else, but I think the kind of experience that this country has gone through is able to be shared and perhaps to be learned by so many people. One of the things we were speaking about is that it's very rare, to find a governing party, particularly on the African continent, relinquishing power so easily if it loses elections. Yes, the ANC, in terms of our electoral system, still was the biggest party, but it did not win the outright majority. Instead of what perhaps could have happened elsewhere, seeing people complaining, the army getting into the streets, it was actually the first party that basically said, you know what, we accept what South Africans have said, so we will work within that framework so that we accommodate everyone. And that is the rationale of then looking into this GNU. You'd recall that they had about 3 scenarios. Do we go for Grand Coalition, do we go for minority government, or you go for a GNU that will then create the platform that will allow just about everyone who wants to take part. And then certainly that is what it chose to do. And I think as those leaders that Sophie Mokoena is speaking about are disembarking as well, I think also, I mean, someone like Dennis Sisongweso, who's been there for many years, they are also taking note as well to say, here are our colleagues, here are our allies, so this is how they respond to indications or situations like this. At some point a few years ago, he did have a bit of difficulty. I think there were attempts where people wanted to perhaps stage a coup, but I think they were able to repel it. I mean, repel it before it could even happen. So countries like this, I can tell you now, Bongewe, they are also taking note. And it's good that South Africa is actually leading in this environment, because it then makes the issue of the will of the people the real thing, not just speaking about it, but it is there in practice.
Especially if, South Africa is then being called upon in some of these instances to go and possibly play a mediator role. You speak from a position of authority, because in your own country, that has actually happened. Exactly.
I mean, it really places us in a very interesting position globally and even on the continent. But of course, there would be those who would be traditional allies of the ANC, who probably would think twice about ish. So if this happens to them, so clearly it can happen to us. And then if it does, you have seen how it's done. So you respect the will of the people. You see, we chose the democratic system, and sometimes it's easier said than done. It's easier to say we're a democracy, but once it starts producing the results that don't necessarily favor you, and then you see someone then rebelling against it. So if you are a true Democrat, you then are bound by those results, and then you respect them.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, because I know you always call these things and then somehow we get to see them. A number of people are saying, okay, the inauguration comes, but then, what kind of government does South Africa then have? I mean, this government of national unity, who is going to form part of this particular cabinet? I wonder, what are we hearing in that regard?
Well, we are hearing that this government will comprise of people from different parties. Of course, the ANC will still be the dominant feature, but you will see a sizable number of the DA leaders, or rather people in that government. And of course, the IFP is part of it. And it's not only the ministries that people need to look at. Remember, there is so much that also can be dispensed, if I were to use that one. Yes, there are committees, and even the executive. The executive goes beyond cabinet, the cabinet which refers only to ministers. But then when you're talking about executive, then you're including the deputy ministers. So some of the parties, they'll be given cabinet committees, parliamentary committees, and then the deputy ministries, or even the ministers. So what you're going to have a situation where obviously the ANC will be the dominant feature, but there will be other parties which will play a key role. For me, Bongiwe, is to check who gets what, because some of those ministries are quite strategic.
And speaking of strategic, Mzwai, I mean, when you think about KwaZulu-Natal, for example, there's a lot of reaction, particularly to how that particular government has now been formed. You think about the fact that the Democratic Alliance is in finance there, also in public works, a number of people having a lot to say about those strategic positions as well.
Oh yes, but I think in KZN also it's a bit different because the party which won the biggest number of votes is outside, and I think those three, or rather those four parties, somehow divided those positions in the manner in which they did.
You think
obviously,
it was a fair division that has nothing to do with what's possibly happening at national level?
I guess they also had to look at what is it that they want to achieve, because at the end of the day, it ought not to be about self-interest. I mean, if you are saying you're contesting state power to better the lives of the people, do put people who will be able to carry out that mandate of bettering the lives of the people. If Bongiwe is better suited to being the health minister, I don't have to do that with my perhaps qualification that has nothing to do with health, maybe in geography. So I must give someone who is able to handle that. So I would assume in their wisdom, as they apportioned those ministries and those positions amongst themselves, they looked at those. Of course, as you've been saying, people were looking at some of the strategic ministries, and then they felt the DA got the ones.
You know, and of course, you know, when we talk about strategic, we're also thinking about the president. I mean, the president-elect tomorrow has got another chance to tell South Africans what his intentions as the head of state is, because when you think about the intention, what do you have? What vision do you then have for South Africa? What are your intentions going into the 7th administration? That also comes with a lot of pressure, given the kind of election we just had, given the kind of climate that there is in the country.
Oh yes, and the team he will assemble will then give us a glimpse into what exactly he wants to achieve. Because I think I see the president of Congo is coming out there. Yes.
And I wonder, Sophie, if you are able to hear us, we can then see President Denis Sassou Nguesso there getting off that aircraft. I wonder if you can pick up from here, Sophie?
Yes, indeed. He's now about to greet the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Senzo Mchunu, and also greet the members of the Air Force with those formalities there, while you have the Basotho group also rendering an item. He will soon get in one of these cars that are waiting here, and then he will go to the hotel, and tomorrow he will join other leaders who have already arrived. And we saw earlier on, I saw there you had the arrival of delegation from Lesotho at OR Tambo, and here we have the arrival of the president of Congo-Brazzaville, President Sassou Nguesso. Let's perhaps just internalize this net sound.
And that is the president of Congo-Brazzaville there, Denis Sassou Nguesso, arriving at the Waterkloof Air Force Base. And you can see on camera there, Sophie Mokoena is standing by as we continue to monitor these dignitaries that are arriving in the country. Sophie, of course, a lot of focus not only on those dignitaries there, but also on the program tomorrow.
Yes, of course, it will be interesting to hear what President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to say, particularly when you look at a paragraph perhaps on international relations. I have no doubt that many leaders will be waiting to hear what will be the line of march in terms of the international relation and South Africa's foreign policy. But as I pointed out, the ANC has indicated that we are not going to see a huge shift in relation to the foreign policy of the country. And I think very soon, Bongiwe, we will see a plane from Mozambique. The president of Mozambique will arrive very soon here at Waterkloof. While on the other hand, OR Tambo will see more dignitaries arriving at OR Tambo. We'll come back to you as soon as Mozambique has touched down.
All right, that is Sophie Mokoena, our international news editor, who's been monitoring what's taking place there at the Waterkloof Air Force Base as the heads of state arrive. We'll continue then to go back to her as she brings us up to speed with who has arrived. Now, I'm still in studio with our political editor, Mzwandile Mbeje. Now, Mzwandile, when you think about that moment in the inauguration, and I'd like to borrow from President Cyril Ramaphosa's inauguration in the past, and he says that these 490 men and women whom you have sent to Parliament seem to have heard the same call that the Lord made to Isaiah when he said, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And then he said, "Tumamina." And then he continues and continues, and he says, "Having taken the oath of office, I am saying yes, South Africa, Tumamina, and I pledge here today that I will serve you, I will work with you side by side to build the South Africa that we all want and deserve. A new era has dawned in our country. A brighter day is rising upon South Africa and upon our beloved continent of Africa." And these were his words in his first inauguration. You then look at the climate currently, as he is now going to be again taking this particular oath of office and then telling South Africans why they should rally behind his vision. That is a mammoth task.
Oh, obviously it is. It is. And I think as he is serving his last term now, I think there's something that Sophie did say, to say he can do as much as he wants. I mean, right now, you don't have to be tiptoeing around some of the issues, because this is your last term. You have to make the mark. And his argument has been to say in his first term, he found himself facing the biggest pandemic in 100 years, COVID, which is, I guess, is something that no one really expected. And a lot of jobs were lost there. So basically, it just disrupted our way of living. So since then, life has never been the same. So those are some of the issues. And then he would keep on referring also to the issues of the state capture. But the problem where I think the governing party perhaps could have, I think, done better in terms of handling is the issue around load shedding. Yes, that also has been a difficulty. And I think South Africans have kind of like internalized that. And perhaps part of the reason why the governing party was punished the way it did, but the way South Africans did. So he has the opportunity now to start from scratch in inverted commas, working together with his colleague, with his opponents, because they have all told us that it's about the country, not so much about themselves or about their parties. So the questions that South Africans will be waiting and will be wanting to hear tomorrow, in terms of the answers, what exactly is the president going to say, particularly because he has the support from his opponents? What is in the best interest of the country?
So what is in the best interest of the country is going to be quite the big question, Mzwai. And let's pause for a second. I do understand that, Sophie, as we can see there on the side of the screens, there is, of course, another head of state who is arriving. Sophie, are you able to see who is on that plane?
Yeah, we expect that this will be a plane carrying the president of Nigeria. You know that Nigeria is the second largest economy. South Africa now is the first largest economy on the continent. We expect the president of Nigeria to be in that plane. He is here on behalf of his country, Nigeria, but also you know that Nigeria is the current chair of ECOWAS, the regional body in West Africa, and therefore he will be representing the regional body and also Nigeria. We know that President Ramaphosa did attend the inauguration of President Tinubu when he was elected and when he was sworn in Nigeria as the president of that country. As I pointed out earlier on, you have some of these leaders representing their countries, but also the regional organizations that they are chairing. You know that with IGAD, we expect the president of South Sudan to be here. With SADC, we saw the president of Angola, who is the current chair. We also saw the incoming president of SADC, President Emmerson Mnangagwa. And therefore, this is the arrival of Nigeria in South Africa, representing the country, but also the regional organization, ECOWAS. You know that he has dealt with lots of challenges immediately after he was elected. Those coups in the West Africa, where he had to intervene, particularly in a country, Niger, when there was a coup there. But later, they had to lift the sanctions against Niger. And here is President of Nigeria arriving in South Africa.
And of course, as we await there the president to come off that aircraft, the president of Nigeria, some of the heads of state who have already arrived in South Africa. There's Namibian President Nangolo Mumba and Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa, who have already touched down at the Waterkloof Air Force Base in Centurion. Now, these are heads of state who are greeted by the National Ceremonial Guard and the ceremonial dancers, and comprehensive safety, of course, and security protocols are also in place, both at the Waterkloof as well as OR Tambo International Airports in Kempton Park, which is in OR Tambo. It's where most of also the dignitaries are also arriving, and several roads around the union buildings as well have been closed ahead of this particular event. And President Cyril Ramaphosa there will take the oath of the office for a second term. A lot of focus, of course, on who then becomes part of his administration. And as Mzwa is even saying here in studio to us, that it goes beyond who is in cabinet. There's going to be quite a lot of other positions that are also critical. You think about the committees in Parliament, for example. Those are also going to be areas of focus. Do we possibly have a new Scopa chair, or do we see another Scopa chair? These are some of the questions that are going to be, grappled with, particularly when you think about how this particular government of national unity is to be comprised. You also now look at the developments around this afternoon that, the PAC has now joined the government of national unity. What does it mean then for that progressive forum earlier on in the, when we saw earlier on before the first sitting of Parliament, these political parties were expressing unhappiness about the turn of events. So it's going to be quite interesting times, and we will have a conversation shortly with Professor Raymond Parsons, who is also going to be talking about this particular administration and what it's likely to look like. So as we wrap up then our conversation with you, so I know it's going to be a long day tomorrow and it starts very early, but let's talk about what can we expect then in terms of how things are likely to unfold tomorrow.
Well, it's going to be obviously the swearing in of President Ramaphosa, and you'd know that between now and tomorrow when he takes the oath, we still have the government, the government that was ushered in 2019. They're still fully operational, active. That's why you see the ministers out there receiving presidents from around the continent. But upon him taking that oath, so that means the government is dissolved. He assumes all the executive authority. And that's why ordinarily, immediately, a day later, he will then appoint his cabinet, because you don't want to allow a vacuum. Well, there's no vacuum, but the thing is that he is everything. So I'm sure he would want to then devolve that power to other people. So we expect the cabinet appointment as soon as possible, perhaps the next day, and then once that is done, it will be the swearing in of those ministers, which will include the deputy president. Remember, he has the sole prerogative of appointing cabinet. That includes the deputy president and the ministers. I think that's what the constitution basically gives him, so that when we ask him questions to account, he will say, I did it myself.
All right, it's going to be an interesting one, and looking forward to the developments tomorrow, as your team and everyone else will be bringing us, the blow-by-blow encounters and also the updates of what's taking place there. And of course, the inauguration of South Africa's seventh democratically elected president will signal the start of the government of national unity.